The topic of today is one for both CTOs and CEOs. Obviously, all three of us have got extensive experience in being the person that our co-founders or our C-suite looks at to build and deliver software or implement the hopes and dreams or run towards milestones. And so I wanted to get us together to talk a little bit about when do companies need full-time CTOs? When do they need fractional CTOs? I have opinions about if they need CTOs at all. Some school of thought is you always need a CTO, they just look different. And so I thought that the three of us could have a little conversation about what we've seen, what our experiences have shown us, what has it looked like for you to work in a really, when is it too late, I would say? Or when have you walked into a situation where complacency has just produced a really slow delivery cycle or bad quality? Okay, so let's jump into CEOs, co-founder, whatever comes to you. They've built a product, they've built it on the backs of a dev shop. They are gaining traction. They feel pretty good about the growth rates. But now they're coming to you and they're saying, man, I'm hearing all this talk about a CTO. I'm hearing CTO this, CTO that. What does a CTO do? Should I have a CTO? What do you tell them? What are the questions that you ask? Or what comes to mind for you as I'm saying these things? What are some of the first instincts that you have, both of you being seasoned CTOs?
I think my first reaction there is the situation you're describing. You've already solved a lot of the initial risks, or at least started to address many of the initial risks in any startup. So right off the bat, you've answered some key questions, which are: am I building something people want? Are people willing to pay for it? And how will people find me? And I think those, before you get into questions about technology and how things will be done, you need to answer those questions. So it sounds like in your scenario, somebody has already answered those questions. Then getting into the CTO, I look at it as a de-risker. So looking at your own background and your own expertise, what are your blind spots? Is the tech, how big a blind spot is technology? And looking forward in the business, how much are you going to rely on technology to drive enterprise value? And if that scale, either we're looking to drive a lot of value, enterprise value out of technology, and technology is a pretty big blind spot for me, then it's probably time to talk to a CTO or bring on a CTO.
Yeah, so two things come to my mind usually. It's there's a technology leader, as in a technology, you need to bring in technology leadership into your organization, or is it organizational leadership? And so there's different ways of approaching it. Look, my technology house is on fire and I need someone to either A, put it out or put it on a better path of success. And the question that you become is that you need to ask then is this a CTO that needs to come and do this? Or is it some other type of technology lead that needs to come in and solve this particular problem? When it's an organizational challenge, so that you're then going into the growth and the scaling parts of your business, which is your organization. And so I think there's a great deal of confusion out there as to where am I on the organizational growth scale. And I think there's a tremendous amount of confusion as to when is the right time to bring on a CTO as opposed to a technology leader.
Mm.
And I think that perhaps more CEOs need to be challenged on why they feel they need to have a technical leader on board. And is it someone who's just going to go put out technology fires and deal with those devs that don't seem to understand what the heck I'm asking them to do, or they're building stuff that I don't understand it. The CEO, regardless of whether technology is a blind spot to them or not, if they are building a company, they need to be able to understand why this person coming on board. And by the way, this person being at his level or her level, they need to ask the question as to this person's going to take care of this. So what does that free me up to do? And what is that going to make? How is that going to make the org successful? Because I brought this person on board. And so I think most CEOs do not know how to have that conversation and discussion. Most of the times it's putting out fires.
Yeah.
And if someone is calling to you about putting out a fire, then you have multiple entry points. Like for me, it's a conversation about why a fractional role would sound better, or even advisory wise, why something would be better. I think the biggest issues I've come across is when they have a technical co-founder and there's a lot of issues and they want you to come alongside and ease yourself into the process and take over or keep this madman away from the code. How do we lock it down? There's so many different things that come about. So, but honestly, at the end of the day, for me, I see it all as organizational issues and less about a technical issue or a technology issue or even a business issue for that matter. It's just that most of the time it's an organizational issue. And I don't know, most leaders don't seem to really understand it is a process that your organization needs to go through. And guess what? You're the one who has to figure that out. And there's not this magical person that's going to come in and just put your org on the path to success. They may put the tech org on the path to success. Doesn't mean that your entire.
I'm hearing this delicious distinction from both of you around de-risking technical issues and or hedging my organizational growth. And one feels a lot like a here and now delivery challenge that people have conflated maybe the role of CTO to solve, when really you could solve it with a dev shop, a fractional engagement, a getting that delivery back on track. And, or you could say, hey, like you said, Jim, my organization has certain technical complexities, or I have a potential cliff ahead of me in terms of my hiring for those complexities. So I need a longer term organizational setup, like you said, Nishant, that needs to be the machine that helps grow my technical organization versus I have a couple glitches in my technical delivery. I may not need a CTO for that.
Yeah. And that's where the fractional side comes into play, because when you're bringing on a fractional CTO, you're not trying to, my favorite part is that most CEOs thinking that they're going to get a full-time CTO for a fraction of the cost. Hang on. No, that's not what's happening right now. But really it's about you scope. What are some of the major broken issues that you're facing right now? And let me either figure out a way to fix it or put it on the path to healing, or let me increase velocity on something. Like you've got a delivery that you've got to get to in order to get to your Series A round or whatever. Like you have something, right? You got, at the end, you mentioned a cliff. And I find it very awesome that it's always a cliff. Someone's dying at the end of it. But the funny thing about it is that I think, again, it's, a fractional person can come on and really understand, hone in on that particular problem and then get to delivery. And I think that's a great way for fractional leadership to be able to come in, and they know how to identify, they know how to understand what needs to be, no, we're not doing that. We are doing this. And we're ruthlessly prioritizing ourselves in this direction and forcing that conversation to happen. But to me, the role of the CTO, if you will, is, far more important and much more longstanding than just coming in delivering velocity or deliver the step before you take the cliff leap. That's my point.
I know that you have been for many years in that fractional war room. And so I get what you're saying. Jim, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree completely. I think a lot of the value that a CTO adds to your organization is not paid back in a short period of time. So fractional CTOs will often come in and they will get your organization on track, but the work that they're doing, the work that any CTO is doing, is often paid back 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the line. And it is nice for the long term to have somebody where your interests are aligned, where that person has, as they're going through these efforts, they have their eye on where the company is going to be in 5 years, where it's going to be in 10 years, and is committed to living with the decisions and the processes and procedures that the CTO is putting in place.
I really love the juxtaposition there, Nishant, that you introduced about it's less of a technical hire. And again, I'm conflating, we need to scale our architecture. We need a CTO. You don't necessarily need a CTO, or hey, it's an organizational or it's a business hire. Then that's the CTO is really comfortable in that. And I've often seen when I introduce candidates to each other, the mismatch. Because again, we're right now talking about the early stage hiring of a CTO. The founder is expecting, the programming language, the customer support tickets, the product development roadmap. The founder is expecting those types of questions when, like you pointed out earlier, Jim, the CTO candidate is way more interested in how is this solving business problems? What is the projected growth? Where are we going in terms of traction? And I find oftentimes that when I'm introducing these people, clearly there's a mismatch in the types of questions the founder or the CEO is expecting versus the stuff that the CTO candidate is super duper interested in.
Yeah, I think that's huge because many times I'm in a situation where it doesn't feel like you just need a solid technical person to come in, because one of the things that a lot of CEOs out there is how much time do you spend on coding? And I'm saying right there, I know right off the bat that you're not looking for a CTO. And so it becomes very difficult then to align with that vision of what they think that a CTO is supposed to do. And then the question of what does a CTO deliver? What is it? As Jim said, I love what you said, Jim, earlier about the long, which is, those decisions, you're not going to see the turnaround, like scaling architecture. Let's be honest with ourselves. We scale an architecture, you're not going to see you might optimize something and you might see an increase in output. But again, long-term and creating business value is not on day one. And then there's also decisions that need to be made along the way to scale that architecture and get to that point. That's what I'm saying. I think at the end, the mismatch that you're identifying in the marketplace when you're trying to bring people together, I face that so many times because because when I ask business questions, I always get this puzzled look on CEOs' faces. When most of my discovery sessions are really about trying to understand the boundaries of the vision of whatever it is that they're trying to solve. And I tell them, I said, so one of the things I keep saying is that, look, you don't seem to have a clear product vision. And without product vision, it's hard to be, in a way, dogmatic about your technical choice. And the dogma in our culture tends to be something that you get, like, not for us. We're not, but hang on. How do you make decisions of that? Because if I'm able to go anywhere with my technical decisions, I'm going to put that organization in jeopardy very soon. Just to flip it around I've tried to switch the conversation about technical debt, not being technical debt, but organizational debt. Because I think when you put it in technical debt terms, it seems like it's one department's issue. And no, it becomes the entire organization's issue because there's a downstream effect, there's an upstream effect, there's a whole, we're not able to implement faster, it becomes an organizational issue and it's driving your business value down. And by the way, worse when an investor comes in and does an audit on your stuff and they find out that you missed out on this great opportunity because you haven't dealt with this technical debt. So I think shifting that, I'll keep coming back to this organizational proposition of a CTO, and really if CEOs, COOs, all these C-suite level executives would understand that the way they're hiring themselves onto the business is also how they should be looking on how to bring on a tech leader onto their business. The CTO is not some fringe operator that comes in and is doing magical key turning.
Yeah, and I think the CTO is genuinely interested in the growth of the business. And whenever we are hiring CTOs or bringing a CTO into the C-suite, a technical voice of technology into the C-suite, we need to understand that person isn't there to grow technology. They're there to grow the business. And I think that's the conversation that people are often not ready for.
Yeah, and I think the T there in the CTO is how do we use technology to create leverage to grow the business?
Absolutely.
Yep.
And that's why, and that's why I'm totally fine with a non-technical person being in the role of CTO if they understand technology should be able to do these things. I understand business, therefore I would like to see technology enable these aspects inside of our business that will grow and scale our business. And so I want to move a little bit towards the technical side of things. So obviously all three of us are where we are today because we love technology and we were tinkering with the code and we were hacking the consoles and we were building programs or coding programs that when run could potentially generate revenues. So there is that extreme comfort with technology that makes us, if we can plus the business speak in there, makes us incredibly valuable inside of the C-suite. What is a good CTO candidate, or what do you like to see in fellow CTOs that whether you have those skills or whether you admire those skills in other CTOs, what do you like to see in a CTO?
And I think the best way to put this is something that I have been told that my fellow senior leadership team members have said that they appreciate about working with me is the ability to technology is complex. It's full of buzzwords. Most people in the room, as you're sitting in a boardroom or you're sitting in an executive meeting, aren't going to be familiar with them. And the ability to take those challenges and complex problems and break them down and make them relatable so that the business as a whole can see what risks the company is facing or what opportunities are out there. Being able to do that translation, but also to decompose complex problems into simple, digestible, understandable decisions, I think it is key.
Yeah, just to riff on that too. One of the things that I love hearing is when people say, I'm really glad you're here because I understand what the challenge is. I understand what the issue is. I understand what level of complexity we're dealing with. And that's, I feel like it's the people who are able to do that really well, because technology is complex. There's just no way around it. Just explaining to someone what a blockchain is. I've been able to try and give the 5 minute explanation of that, but there are even aspects of mine when I go to, I don't know why we do this, but it's a complex thing. But at the end of the day, I think we're not here to make enjoyable tech. So for instance, if I'm out there playing on my Arduino or whatever, or back in the day when we used to go to Radio Shack and build stuff, there was no necessarily, we were building it to create a business out of it. So every move that we make could absolutely be an entire waste of time and totally worth it because we're either learning or we've learned something that doesn't work. That's tech that we do for enjoyment. I think that's what I love about my back is how I got to it. And I'm amazed at how many CTOs have that same sort of story. But I think what the common link that why they're CTOs and not like a Google tech fellow is the fact that they enjoy making a business out of some technology thing. It's a technology hack. We figured it out. And whether it's a workflow, whether it's a process, whether it's whatever, we've shortened the distance between the customer and the problem. And we're using technology to solve that problem. And guess what? We made money. We made X dollars and we sold for this. And, I think that excitement really, when I see that in other CTOs, it's okay, you're my people. You get my excitement.
Yeah.
Yes, I would love to work in amazing tech, but to me, I don't know, there's a validation in a way that I can convert that into some kind of a monetary thing. So I don't know. For me, those fellow CTOs who speak that language, I get all kinds of goosebumps. So.
Yeah, Ryan Rusnak has this great line that I use, which I'm sure he heard somewhere, but the way he said it was, to the tech people, you're the business guy, and to the business people, you're the tech guy. And yeah, so there's that vernacular, there's the language, there's the nostalgia, there's the rooted in understanding. I was speaking of the blockchain. I was so fascinated the other day when I had a conversation about resourcing or resource allocation, memory allocation, packing the bits into the words and the bytes. Back in the day, sorry about that, but we were very mindful of resources, right? Memory was scarce and you had to be prudent with how you used memory. Then, of course, we exploded onto this virtualization scene where no one cares about memory. But now we're back in the blockchain world where packing the bits into the blockchain has now become important again. And now guess what? C and Rust and all these languages are now so popular because those were the people who cared a lot about how they allocated memory. And just being a CTO with that sort of background and the understanding, like you guys both mentioned, the complexity analysis, or understanding what is complex and what isn't, understanding how logic works, being rooted in those first principles, that would be the only voice in the C-suite who understands those things. So the C-suite would benefit from somebody who not only understands that world, loves that world, plays in that world, hacks in that world, but can also do the business speak to understand how that C-suite benefits from that.
Yeah, I think one bad reputation that some CTOs have developed is they're the naysayer in that group. CEO comes up with an idea and CTOs are the first one to say, no, that can't work, or that can't work with our current process or current architecture. And I think I go back to your video about Etienne, about the flying with the CEO, and I've used that so many times because I feel like many times we CTOs feel like we're in the room because we're here to cure the ailments of the C-suite, especially the CEO. We need to reduce the madness. And I'm sitting here going, if your CEO is not mad, then none of you would be there. There is an element of embracing the madness that causes people to be entrepreneurs. And so I don't feel like it's our job to go and cure the CEO of that. I think it's our job to go and figure out a way, okay, how do we derive a path here? And because we're familiar with complexity, and you wouldn't think that in our world, because we're talking about logic and reason, and this happens, and then this happens, and this happens, you would not think that it's a very complex thing, but it is. And we should be able to carve a path of what the CEOs are trying to tell, because they're trying to push something. They're trying to push an idea out there. And our job is to be able to say, what is a pathway to figuring this out? My favorite word, the MVP of that pathway. What is the minimum thing that I can do to make this idea come to fruition? And here's my favorite part. Let's go test it. Let's go build some evidence and bring it back. And one of the things that really irritates me about technical leaders out there who say statements such as, we don't know, or my favorite now, we don't know what we don't know. And for me, I understand that as a phraseology, but for me, it's at the very least, you should be able to hypothesize. Maybe you don't have the data. Maybe you do not have the evidence to back up something, but at the stage that you're in, you should be able to come up with some statement that says, I hypothesize that X.
Nishant, I love what you said, and it brings me to this having inherited such a delicious relationship that has earned the trust, where when you do say those things, it is inherently trusted. Sure, it doesn't go unchallenged, but Jim, talk a little bit about the relationship that you were able to forge with someone where you are actually on your second or third venture now, and the trust that has given you in your role as CTO.
Yeah, myself and my co-founder have been working together about 15 years across 3 different companies. And it's interesting talking about the different roles, and can we open this with different levels of technology leadership? And I've played them all across 3 companies. I was more on the architecture side, an engineer when I first started working with my co-founder. And then I was a fractional and an advisor, and then a co-founder then for this company. And my co-founder is also very technical. He's computer science and IT. And so there was certainly respect for the technical acumen, but I think it is that translation, being able to find opportunities to use technology to create enterprise value, to propel the business forward, and to overcome the challenges the business is facing, that has created that trust, that track record. And I'm not the most in your face personality. I tend to be the last one to speak in a room. And I certainly have had times where we've disagreed on things. But over the years, my co-founder and Andrew would tell you that when I am pounding the desk, that he sits up and pays attention, because at that point, I'm rarely wrong. It's in my personality type to not get to that point unless I'm pretty darn sure. And over the years, building that rapport has created that level of trust.
Yeah, I love that. If I think of and I want to get to, when we talk to CEOs, I don't care if you're seed stage, series A, B, C, it doesn't matter. But I'd love for us to break down the list of what do we want CEOs out there to know about what CTOs look like and how they operate. I think there's sort of an 80% rule out there that most of them are a certain way, if I can stereotype this. But the thing that I find interesting, especially if we go down this business mantra, is the CTO type, as we said, someone who loves technology, has built things with technology, is a builder, loves to tinker, loves to understand what innovations can be derived from technology, but has opened up their world to business objectives and business growth. That means that they come into the C-suite understanding in some regards what the CEO needs to accomplish: culture and revenues. looking at the CFO, understanding what the metrics need to be for healthy cash flow and good SaaS metrics. A lot of us as CTOs have SaaS metrics, i.e., the dollar sign, LTV, cost of acquisition. This is part of our world. So we look at our different, even CMOs, right? We look at the marketing, we look at where they're going. A lot of us have been in an operational role, COO. So in many ways, when we look at those concentric circles, a lot of us have expanded our worlds as CTO to understand what those other C-suites need to accomplish. Now, what have they done to expand their worlds to understand what it is that we do? Now, if I point the finger at them, I'd say, dude, what are you doing to understand what blockchain means? Or when you say the words AI, or when you say cloud, or when you say sound effects with the UI, it took you 2 weeks last time to add those pixels. It should take you 2 weeks this time to add these other pixels. So if I point the finger, I'm like, what have you done, C-suite, to understand our world? If I don't point the finger and I don't play the victim, what am I doing as CTO to let people into understanding the complexities that we face and what makes technology hard? And so a lot of what I like to see in a CTO is someone who is willing to facilitate those conversations. I like to tell CTOs, you have to answer those dumb questions 1,000 times and be happy and nod your head and smile. Yes, I will happily walk you through this again. Or if the room is quiet after my presentation, to really facilitate, well, what's going on with people? How do I get them to ask those difficult questions? But I find that the intersection of those concentric circles is where we as CTOs really have to facilitate bringing people into our world to understand what it is that we do. Because I don't think a lot of them fully understand what we do.
I would say it doesn't just stop internally either, especially if, and it depends what market you're selling into, but oftentimes you're educating the prospect, the customer in that same way. So being able to speak that language and not just bring your fellow C-suite into the challenges the organization faces from a technology standpoint, but also bring your customers, your prospects around to why your technology, the way you're innovating can help their organizations, is different or separate from your competitors, what advantages you have. I don't think it stops at the boardroom door.
Totally. And that brings up that question of trust, right? Can this person be trusted? Whenever I hear a prospect ask for the CTO, I always think, okay, they're looking for a reason to trust or not to trust. And so they want to bring in the technical lead to see, if I place my livelihood into your service, can I trust that the service is going to be around for X number of years, and how are they scaling?
Yeah, and that goes, especially you talking about timing of having a CTO on board, that also depends on where the organization is in terms of fundraising too, because that your investors need to have that same trust that the organization from a technology standpoint is in good hands. And as we said earlier, with someone who has some skin in the game, is committed to the long-term vision of the company, and that the technology challenges the company will face will not be a distraction to the CEO. So that trust, it's your fellow C-suite, it's from your investors, it's from your customers. We rubber and trust.
So I think going back to your question regarding, we understand elements of marketing, we understand elements of finance and things like that, LTV, CAC. But I think because I hope I'm not, burning CTOs here, but I think other groups have done better in tying value to those terms than us. Like, we talk about velocity and story points, and we have not done necessarily a good job of saying these metrics drive growth. These metrics drive. So I don't know if we've given enough incentive for someone to come into our world. And I think that's part of the world of Scrum and Agile and all those issues. And I think that, like, I remember in one meeting I was at where the CEO was being told how many story points we delivered to production. I'm just like trying to look across the Zoom room. Is the CEO really interested in this? And it's just being rattled off. And every meeting, I'm sitting going, I don't get this. And so I point blank asked the CEO, can you just tell me where did this come from? I have no clue. I'm trying to see something that says this particular feature deliver.
Such a good point.
So to me, the intersection point for the C-suite is the product and what we're delivering. And that's usually where we communicate, hey, we're setting our eyes on this part of the product. Remember, CEO, you brought this up and you said this is a big field for Q2 of this year. We have got our sights set on this. We've got design thinking, design sprints, trying to understand what is the best way forward. All these things that we're doing in the process. And to me, delivering on those and how we deliver on those things, and then talking about tech complexity in the process will really help people really understand what those things are that drive success. It's not 10 sprints, 3 sprints, 2 sprints. That conversation to me is such it's just empty to me. And I think we need to do a better job of it. Does marketing really care about this, how many story points or what our estimates were, or even how many bugs we delivered into production? I just don't know if those are helpful in getting that education across.
So I want to hear what you have to say, Jim, but what I'm hearing, which is really stunning to me, is have we as CTOs done as good a job as the world has provided for us in the CEOs, revenues, culture, CMOs, user path, I don't know, what's it called? Ad spend slash, what are all those acronyms? I forget those. But how have we as CTOs done a good job at giving our C-suites all our acronyms translatable to business value that they can understand?
Yeah, I agree completely. And it's over, the last 20 years, it's, to me, the organization as a whole has gotten incredibly knowledgeable about what it takes to deliver software relative to their background. Most people now understand sprints and understand when you say, I'm going to my morning stand up, whether you're in marketing or in sales, you know what that means. Yeah. I don't know that we could say the same thing back.
Yeah. Here's something that I want to know from the two of you. When someone says we want to build out a feature that we believe is going to expand our revenues, what I am used to doing is to saying, okay, that will be the epic that will have these different stories that will roll up into the epic. Why am I not saying, well, my estimation is it's going to take between 8 to 12 sprints. Okay. And our sprints are 2 weeks. And yes, there's a buffer for issues, but it can't be that hard to say, okay, I know how many developers are in the sprint. I know what we pay those developers. I know what the sprint's going to cost us. I know how many of those sprints. So therefore, I know that this feature is going to cost us $800,000 if we just do between 8 to 12 sprints. And therefore, the $800K in dev spend to deliver that epic has to tie into how are we recouping our cost? What are we padding onto those to prepare the rest of the organization for customer service, sales and marketing collateral? Is that just par for the course? I don't hear those conversations. Is it just me, or I'm hearing, oh, it's going to take this amount of time, or yeah, I can see us potentially delivering in July. Why are we having those conversations? Why aren't we saying, I need $1 million? That's how we are delivering on this feature or this product enhancement.
We should have a cost per acquisition type, cost per feature build. We should be able to pull out a metric like that. I recently had to do this I was trying to come up with sort of a last mile strategy where I don't know if I want to apply the dev research. So what I went and did was I built out what it cost for us to do it and what it would cost for this partner that we were planning on going with. And yeah, as a research, I outlined all of those things, but we were able to clearly see why build versus buy. It was better to go with this partner for right now. And we had our story to tell investors that, hey, this is our last mile strategy. We're adopting it right now for this purpose so that we can, learn and not learn with using our resources and spending more money on this particular area. Because again, investors want to know, I'm going to give you $10 and you're going to go spend how much on it to do something, or, hey, I spent $2 to learn this much. And now when I'm ready to go do it on my own, I know what exactly I need to do. And so we should be able to have those types of conversations where we have a full understanding of our cost per feature, cost per listing, and then as a result, revenue per feature. I want to see metrics like that.
I want to see CTOs have their little, and if anybody's listening to this, maybe we're just a bunch of doofus CTOs, but I don't think so, because in all my years, I haven't been trained I am an entrepreneurial, business-minded CTO. And yet my default is not to quantify things in dollar spends in a way that helps my C-suite understand what it's going to cost them and what they're going to get for that. Yes, there's budgets like, large scale budgets, especially if you're in that series A and B. And that's why we get to this thing of investors want to know, what are we going to spend? What does the engineering spend look like? And then what do we go to? We go to, well, I'm going to hire these 5 or 10 or 8 people,
Right.
who are going to cost us roughly $300K each. And therefore I need $2.4 million on engineering. No, I don't get that. Why is that why are you doing it that way?
What do you plan on building, and what do you need to build it? And what is the cost? What is the revenue? How do you think that it's going to be? Yeah, those are the kinds of things that are going to shift the conversation. Because a marketing person who comes into this, like, well, I need $2 million for Facebook ad spend, they're going to get laughed out of the room, because sure, every marketing person wants a $2 million Facebook ad spend per month. And so they're talking about, and then again, cost of acquisition. And
yeah, but that's the thing. But that's the thing about the ad spend, though, is it's a supremely one-to-one match on, hey, you spent that 2 million. These are the impressions. This is the sign up.
You're bringing the rest of the C-suite into a conversation that the whole business, going back to original organizational point, this is the conversations that the C-suite and the organization needs to be having. We're going to spend $1, and for that $1, how much are we going to gain in revenue? That should be the conversation that every person, regardless of whatever their focus is, the conversation that they should be having. Yes, even from an engineering standpoint, we should be able to speak on those terms. The thing is, I don't think that we have come up with anything solid. I think there's a lot of PTSD. It's a phrase that I hear a lot with offering things like that, because it commits us to those things. Because if I say that this project is going to generate $3 million in revenue, somehow if we do 2.9 million, that somehow I've fallen terribly short. And yeah, but everybody makes forecasting. There's a forecasting model. There's a way to, it's not a gut thing. It's based on real things. That's why going back to the hypothesize and being able to hypothesize and then being able to go understand what is the data, what is the evidence I need to collect in order to prove that hypothesis, or not prove that hypothesis is wrong, is, I think, very key to the future of the world.
I think that's very true. I think we as the CTO, we're not a cost center. And so it's not just us reporting our expenses and how we're going to deliver things into production. We're trying to create value that is ultimately often captured in other areas of the business. So we're trying to create more activity at the top of the sales funnel, or we're trying to create a higher conversion rate, or we're trying to bring down a churn rate or increase upsells, right? Ultimately, those are the things that create enterprise value. And so those are the things, those are the effects of the business we're trying to create with our $1 million. And it's not unlike marketing and ad sales. For every $2 million Google spend is outrageous unless you have clear line of sight that $20 million revenue you're going to gain from it. And it's the same way with technology. A $2 million technology budget is expensive unless you can create $20 million of enterprise value with it.
And this is where I want to get to, which is, I want my CTO to be the person I can collaborate with on achieving my business objectives. In other words, they need to challenge me, question me, push me on, and I call it you got to wrestle in the C-suite on, is this what our business needs to accomplish in the next 12 months, 24 months, 36 months? But then be able to say, okay, if the net increase is going to be 15%, that's what these dollars. Now we got to put our spreadsheet dollar hats on. Our love for numbers, our love for code should somehow translate in our love for units of measure that we can distill down and say, if you add an extra 50 cents per minute to this activity, then that gets us much closer to our goals. That's the person that I want to have in the C-suite with me. And that's what I want for CTOs.
And I loved you brought up the case of trying to use memory efficiently. And I love that as an analogy because you're resource constrained, but ultimately you have to create an outcome. Your function has to do something. It has to have some value. So these are inherently skills we are used to.
And we would, like you said, we would do that all day. If you,
all day.
you remember that scene in Apollo or whatever, where they were like, you only have Scotch tape, you have 2 nails, you have 3 bags of popcorn. Get my men back. It's like, hey, those engineers went to town.
And
We
so
would do that all day.
we can. And as you go in your career and you end up in CTO, it's still the same exercise. It's just you are using the organization as your experiment, do the function.
Part of the challenge is going back to the memory conversation too, is that the margins in our businesses are very high. It's ridiculous, some of the margins that I see out there. I think that if we were thrust into trying to eke out a margin, I think we would also do better. But simply because we're dealing with $900 million in budgets, we don't feel the particular need to try and squeeze anything out of the margin. And I think that's made us in a way lazy in that regard. So therefore we talk about sprints and so on. Yes, this feature has got a 3-year roadmap to it. But I think in order to drive harder on building better tech companies, I think the more we can squeeze out of those margins, like with memory, we used to be pressured into writing the best optimal code because we would have all sorts of issues if we did. Memory leakage was a fairly common thing that we would say. Honestly, I don't think I've heard it in the last 10 years because people are just not even thinking in those terms.
And now we're back, guys. We're back to smart contracts that can only have X number of bytes on the blockchain. Now, here's what I would say as we wrap up. It's almost like when I think of the squishiness of developer hours and productivity, yes, that's a very draining conversation. X number of points out of them this week, or did I get what happened? There's a people management, there's an output prediction component to this that's exhausting and impossible. And it's almost like we've given up. I can't even tell you how many sprints it's going to take because life. Stop trying to have me predict how long it's going to take me to get from San Diego to San Francisco if I drive on the Big Sur, because it's impossible to know. But here's where I think the opportunity lies for us is, like you said earlier, Nishant, can we start coming up with units of measure that are fun for us to work with, because it abstracts out the stuff that is hard to be discrete about, but it still gives us a sort of that unit that we can work with that has all the fuzziness inside of it, but we don't have to think about it. And I used to call them blocks. I had this fantasy about, I have this unit of measure, it's called a block, and it has inside of it, it has all the messiness of people and points and complexities and missed deadlines. But if given that block is true and it delivers X, well, how many of the blocks will give me X to the power of what, And so getting a little passionate right now, but can we turn the dial and land on a unit of measure that the C-suite can comfortably embrace and know how to attach dollar value to it, and therefore know what it's going to take to accomplish certain business objectives?
I'm going to say it's very doable. And I think not only is it doable, it has to be done, because I think many times when we talk about metrics for the engineering team, it turns into a really silly conversation. And then we're looking at velocities. And I don't understand, how does velocity at this rate give me, what does it give me? What does it give me?
And it gives the C-suite, reduces the work that we do as CTOs to the one thing that the C-suite's like, oh, okay, so you want me to work in terms of dates. If you're talking about velocity and sprints, these are all time-based. Okay, then just tell me when's it going to be done. And then you're like, man, stop asking me when it's going to be done. But that's the only thing you've given me to work with.
Exactly. So the reason we have PTSD is because time is never on anybody's side, Frank.
Yeah.
But if has it ever been communicated to the CEO how much we spent in creating this particular feature or whatever? And by the way, here's the more important thing: collecting the evidence that, hey, we recouped the cost, and now we're starting to make a profit. And so we're not doing that. and we're not doing anything to do anything about it. And so I think that's what I'm saying. Many times, we should not be surprised at some of the conversations we get sucked into. Because again, like I said, we deal with very complex systems and garbage in, garbage out, right? So you put in garbage into the garbage metrics into the C-suite, and they come back, like you said, with the time bound stuff. Were you expecting something else? And so I think that's where I think we have an incredible opportunity, as 7 CTOs here, I would love to see a charter of things and what we can be looking for and try to figure out how best to calculate this. I would love to see a calculus.
It's starting to sound like a CEO now, because now
Yeah.
now the work is rolling from here.
Epics or build stories as a user.
This is not to say, I know that people listening to this, clearly people are working with budgets all day long. And yes, the rubber hits the road with dollars and cents. Of course, we're not saying that world doesn't exist. We're just saying, what does a world look like where the CTO is participating in the C-suite in a currency that everyone understands? And if you're facing the time currency, then maybe that's all you've given your C-suite. Maybe actively work on giving them the dollars and cents currency. Hey, the sprint is 50. Every time a sprint's done, it's 50K out the door. Okay, holy moly's. How are we recouping those costs? What does that mean? How much of that 50K is a prepayment into the futures of technical debt? Okay, I'm actually buying, every 50K is purchasing 5K futures of technical debt.
Yep.
Let's get into that world. And I promise you the C-suite's going to freaking understand very quickly.
I think the challenge there is those metrics are often owned by other departments. We look at ways to demonstrate our value with the metrics that it's clear that we own. But a lot of the metrics which really are impactful for the business are not metrics that we own. They're the sales metrics, or the marketing metrics, or the customer satisfaction metrics. So it's difficult to really quantify how a sprint has a direct impact to customer satisfaction. That's our challenge. And that's a challenge we have to overcome. And there's attempts at things like this in lean startup, the innovation accounting, talking about what revenue is generated from new products and that have been brought to market. But it gets more challenging when really the only metric that is clearly defined by us is margin. And of the enterprise value metrics is probably, as you said, especially in our space, when margins are incredibly high, it's not something you can really claim victory for a 2% improvement.
Yes. Jim landing us on the cold reality that this is not an easy thing to solve. It's not. It's hard to, but I would say, hey, CTO, spend your time on paving that communication, like work hard at bringing that into the C-suite versus like the gatekeeper of deliveries and deadlines, and those are difficult. Can this be done conversations? Like this is what a naive C-suite's going to keep throwing at you, and it's your job to educate, to earn their trust, to be empathic about the business growth, and to be the people that the C-suite can talk to about what's going on in the engineering department, which in many SaaS companies, it's the biggest spend they have on the P&L.
There is no one more qualified in that room to draw those connections.
So let's do some spreadsheeting, man. Let's fall in love with our spreadsheets again. Traditionally in my worlds that I've been in, whenever I've been CTOing, the COO is the one who builds the most prolific spreadsheets. Dude, they can build spreadsheets, man. Whew. Okay, team. Thank you so much for your time. I really enjoyed this. Any final words? Your dream CTO? Anything else? Counting down?
I think one thing that I would have loved to talk about is, so we were talking about when is the right time to bring on a CTO, right? I'd love to spend some time on other leaders in the technical line besides the CTO that are very crucial to the success of a tech organization. I think trying to constantly talk about the CTO, there's VP of it, there's so many other levels that are equally necessary, if not more, in order to be successful as a tech organization. Why is it important to, I think maybe there's a more appropriate question is, when is the right time to build out your tech organization, a tech leadership organization, tech org? And I think that will then maybe hopefully shift the mind of what a CEO is looking at. It's just hiring a CTO and just delivering velocity, and then maybe expand that out a little bit. But there are many other very important roles in the engineering org.
Good point. Yeah, I often tell founders, especially if they're bringing in their first CTO, I'm like, get ready to spend a lot more money because the CTO is going to identify the gaps and want to hire more people. But again, this is all, like you said, Nishant, it's the organizational growth and it's an organizational thing. Okay, Jim, Nishant, thank you. Maybe there's a
It was fun.
part 2 on the other roles.
Absolutely.
Take care.